Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hey kids, welcome to Grumpy Nostalgia, the Second Look Cinema podcast, the show where we go back to the blockbuster new release wall in our memories, grab a copy off the shelf, pop it in the old VCR, and see what time has done to it. I'm Justin, that's Mike.
Top of the morning, and buongiorno.
Okay, and we're here to help you navigate all those landmines littered down memory lane. So Mike, we're going to try to do a good movie this week. Yes, the last few that we looked at they're fun, but they're kind of dogs, let's be honest. I was just kind of briefly discussing with my wife, who's my best critic, whether I asked her to be or not. And she came to me and said, why don't you guys do a real movie?
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm going to take that advice from my betrothed, like I do all her other advice, by saying, yes, dear. But then I started to think about it after she said that, and she's kind of got a point, and I hate when that happens. But the concept of this show is to kind of go back and see, are movies as bad as we remember, or are movies as good as we remember? So, I mean, this is a good opportunity to see. I mean, it's no mistake that this is a well-received, almost perfect movie. But is that still how we feel about it, Mike? So we're going to take a look at that this week.
I don't know. It could be like Congo.
I did like Congo the first time I saw it. So
that's right.
There's our warning. So when we were discussing before we kind of picked our topic, we were kind of thinking about, what good movie would we really want to tackle first. Now, we've done some good movies, don't get me wrong, but this one's kind of in the upper stratosphere. I think you would agree. Current events has kind of steered us one way or the other. So the last month in particular have been kind of sad, kind of some bad news out of Hollywood. We've lost some big actors in the last few weeks, Mike. Notably James Caan. We lost Pauly Walnuts from The Sopranos. We lost Ray Liotta, and Paul Sorvino.
Yeah.
And those last three guys were all featured prominently in the movie we're going to talk about this week. So we're going to talk about Goodfellas from 1990, Mike.
Wow.
Yeah.
1990.
Just recently.
Oh my gosh, 32. I'm really bad at math.
That would be 32 years,
Yes.
Mike.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So it kind of hit me that the actors of this generation before us are kind of falling to the wayside, kind of dying off, and it's sad, and it kind of made me think about my own mortality just a little bit, because we're men of a certain age, they call it now, Mike, where
boomers,
like the generation. Yeah, no, we are
no.
not boomers. No, we're Gen Xers, Mike.
Gen Xers. Okay, I always forget that. I'm sorry. I know there's X, Y, Z, millennials, and
I kind of lose track of the stratosphere myself, but
okay.
We're the last analog generation for sure.
Right.
But me and Mike are at a weird age where we're young enough to be considered not old, but we're too old to be considered young. So I get AARP flyers in the mail, plus I also get Charlotte Comic-Con flyers in the mail. So I'm in that gray zone.
But I guess what I was going to say was, don't you feel? Okay, let's imagine this way. We're both, we can be open about this. We were born in 1970. Imagine going back and then looking at Gone with the Wind or Grapes of Wrath or Wizard of Oz that came out 31 years earlier. Wow. And just the difference between that generation and then like 1990 and us now. I don't feel, to me, because we're old farts, 1990 doesn't seem like 1939 to 1970 to me, because it's just, it can't be that much time has gone by, and we haven't really advanced that much, right? I mean, we're still young.
Well, in our mindset, time is not linear. It's kind of exponential, right? So I remember watching movies with my dad when I was a kid, and he was a fan of like the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields and Jimmy Cagney movies. And I'm thinking, I watched these movies in the 70s, and they were only 30 years old then. Now we're talking about that's where it kind of grows you, kind of hits you. Yeah. But all right, well, regardless of our age, I think we should press on.
Sorry about that cul-de-sac trip down memory lane.
Yeah. Goodfellas was released on September 21st, 1990. It was directed by Martin Scorsese, Mike. You might remember him from such greats as Boxcar Bertha, Hugo,
Yes.
and Kundun was one of the big ones. But for our younger generation, he's the kind of fell into an okay boomer moment here not too recently, complaining about Marvel movies, and kind of got scolded by all the younger generation of filmmakers. He's not a big fan of the comic book movies, Mike, and he had the nerve to kind of voice his opinion about that, and kind of fell into
Oh,
some hot water. But
yeah. I don't
you
see
know,
that.
yeah,
Back to the generation differences. Like
yeah.
if you're of that age, you don't do that and then expect the blue check marks on Twitter to be very happy with you.
Yeah, what I seriously doubt that Martin Scorsese gives a
Who
crap
cares?
about what
Yeah.
McG thinks about him. So. But okay, so we'll get to some of that defiance as we proceed here. So, as I mentioned, it was directed by Martin Scorsese. It was also written by Martin Scorsese, and then co-written by Nicholas Pileggi. It had a budget of only about $25 million, Mike. Even back
Wow.
then, that was kind of a low ball. It's kind of a low end budget for a movie this size, I think.
Well,
Um,
you look at movies he did before this. He never really had I'm not gonna say a blockbuster. He had award winning movies, but none of them were like
yeah,
what you would
yeah.
consider anything
No,
that would need a giant enormous budget or would allow for a
no,
big budget like that. You
no.
think
They were literally,
Taxi Driver, and
yeah,
Raging Bull.
mean,
You can
yeah,
watch
Mean Streets. Yeah,
Raging Bull and look like that was shot for $100. And literally,
yeah,
and it's a gritty movie, but it's you can tell
yeah.
he really everything was with Goodfellas. You could tell everything was filmed on location, and there wasn't a lot of you didn't need like on the end of the Mummy where you had 1,000 visual artists.
Yeah, yeah. You said the word gritty, and that's an often that they throw that term out there a lot when they talk about this generation of filmmakers. But you had like Brian De Palma and Barbie Schroeder and those guys
Mm-hmm.
that they really just made story driven, character based movies that were literally dirty. They were just not just a kind of a weird dichotomy to what these movies might not get made today is the point. And that'll might be a recurring theme in this episode if we're not careful. So,
Yeah.
but this movie did feature a pretty prominent cast. Mike, you want to walk us through who was in this movie?
This movie, oh, nobody would know.
Yeah,
There was that guy. And,
that guy from that thing.
our three biggies here. They're on the poster. Of course, Robert De Niro is right in the middle, and Robert De
Yeah,
Niro is an interesting case study. He's Martin Scorsese's. We talk about directors who have a stable of actors they use. De Niro
yeah.
and Scorsese are like peanut butter and jelly, or Elton John and
Mm.
Bernie Taupin. It's like these two guys have made so many good flicks together.
Yep.
You look at a lot of early De Niro work, and it's just amazing his resume, all the way up to say the late 1990s, and then you throw in something like Rocky and Bullwinkle, and it's like, wait. I guess let's go back to the generational thing where some people who see Robert De Niro now don't see that guy who's that in Cape Fear and Raging Bull or in Taxi Driver. They see
Nope.
they watch Meet the Fockers or Dirty Grandpa.
Yeah.
You see the comedic side of it, and I hate that. You mentioned The Irishman, or maybe we haven't mentioned that yet, but
Yeah.
that's a movie too where he's a shell of himself, and it's almost it's like watching Franco Harris. If you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan out there, you
Wow.
imagine him. You imagine him winning the Super Bowls and running like he did. And then you see him play for the Seattle Seahawks, and he's constantly fumbling and running out of bounds. You don't want to see that. And it's the same with De Niro. I watched Goodfellas, and my gosh, the guy is incredible. And you could say, oh, there's the Joker. He was good in that, and he was fantastic in that. But I digress. I kind of wish he had retired a few years ago, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the heart of a lot of our generation died when De Niro decided he wanted to be funny.
Yeah, yeah, to Meet the Parents. And what was it?
Yeah.
Analyze This with Billy
Analyze
Crystal.
this.
Where he kind of mocks the whole. It's a good movie. Don't get me wrong, but it kind of mocks his previous characters as a as a wise guy figure, and it's like, come on, man, you played Al Capone in The Untouchables. You're not this. That was a long.
Hey,
sorry about that.
Who else is in this movie, Mike?
You have his castmate from Raging Bull, Joe Pesci, who when he's not doing Scorsese flicks, he has a touch of comedy in himself. If Home Alone, he's a one of the two villains of Daniel Stern and My Cousin Vinny, where to me that's almost more iconic than his role as Tommy in this movie. It was
Perfect role. Yeah.
It was gold, absolute gold. Our third of the trio is Ray Liotta, who, like you said, just recently died. This was his breakout movie. He'd been in, I think, Field of Dreams as a bit part, and then I think Something Wild. He was kind of
that's the film where he got Scorsese's attention. Yeah,
gotcha. Okay, and I feel like he did good after Goodfellas. I always never felt like he met his potential, and I know it sounds really bad, but he had a lot of good roles in good movies. They were bit parts, and Copland was one of my favorite movies he was in. Blow, he's Johnny Depp's dad. And he was just in the show we talked about last podcast of Blackbird, where he plays the father. But
the father to Taron Egerton. Thank you. We couldn't remember that actor's name.
Yes, so. I called him Eggy.
Thank you for giving me. Thank you for getting the opportunity to set the record straight. So, thanks,
there you go. Served you up. This was his iconic role, and like I said, I don't think he ever matched that potential he had. Lorraine Bracco, who was in Karen, his wife in this movie, she's fantastic. And this was her. I know she was in The Sopranos later on, but the only other movie I could think of her in was Medicine Man with our friend Sean Connery. But other than that, and being in Sopranos, this was her role, there were so many Sopranos cast members in this movie that either had bit parts or, like you said, Tony Sirico, who played Paulie Walnuts, and he had Big Pussy in here. You had Michael Imperioli is in here, the Christopher character from Sopranos, and it's like, hey, that guy. It was just funny to see him.
That would be 27 actors total shared roles in Goodfellas.
Crazy.
And Sopranos.
Those were your main. Well, Paul Sorvino, as you mentioned, another actor who just passed away a few days ago, plays Paulie. He's the head of the. You know what? This is where I got to ask you a question. Is this I know it's kind of based on Henry Hill's story, his life story. But they're not in a real crime family, right? This is like an offshoot of one of the major 5 families of New York.
Yeah, I want to say the Lucchese or the Gambino. Cruz.
Okay, I think that's right. Yeah, well, he's kind of the head of the family, and he's a great character actor, Paul Sorvino, and this is his another. I feel like there's 4 people in this movie. Like, this is their iconic role, and this movie really made some famous characters.
Those gangster fans that may be listening, I could be wrong on that. I know you're probably screaming into your earphones right now, so don't at me. I think that's what it was. So please,
we're talking about gangsters. We're talking about it's not such a thing.
Yeah.
Sorry. Then you had my goodness. Well, let me ask you this. Okay, pop quiz, hot shot. Justin, what's your most random non-Sopranos cameo in this movie?
Well, I really liked Henny Youngman playing a 40-year-old version, 40 years younger version of himself, and Bobby Vinton Jr. playing Bobby Vinton. I thought that was clever. Those were both,
I did like the lounge singers, and I guess it's supposed to be Jerry Vale, but I don't know if it was the real Jerry Vale or not.
That was the real Jerry Vale. Yeah.
Was it? Okay. Yeah. My most random character was Tobin Bell as a probate officer, who some people might know as the Jigsaw villain.
Saw guy.
Yeah, from Saw. And I was like, well, there he is. Literally, it was a blink and you missed it. Samuel L. Jackson's in this movie as Stax. Everybody loves Stax. And
everybody loves Stax.
And then,
up to a point.
Probably the second most random cast member was Martin Scorsese's mom, who's in here playing a mom to Tommy, the Joe Pesci character. And just very, very, very comedic touch in the movie. It's just funny. It was a touch.
Actually, I'll one up you there, Mike. His father's in this movie too.
Really?
His father is Vinny. You recall from the prison cooking scene.
That was his father.
The guy that put too many onions in the sauce.
Yes.
Yes. That's his father. Yeah.
There was a Vinny that was at Tommy's. When they're going to make them, and I don't know if that was the same.
That's the same Vinny.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a funny joke made in the movie about how many Polly's and Pete's and
Pete's, yeah,
Maria's there were, but it's so true.
yeah,
Like you hear
yep.
some of these. I'm glad there's a guy that named Two Time. I'm going to get the papers. The nicknames
Yeah.
are fantastic. I
Oh
can't
yeah,
even begin to like
we'll
go into
get to
those.
that. We'll get into those. Yeah, cool.
But there you go. That's that.
All right. Well, just a few quick notes about the cast in the movie. So Martin Scorsese wanted some true authenticity, as he's wont to do in his films. So he actually stacked or filled a lot of the scenes out, padded them out with real mobsters from the Tri County area. I don't know how he knew these guys, but there's a lot of real mobsters in here, Mike. The F word, the F dash 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 word,
Frickin'.
Mike, uh,
Oh,
is mentioned 320 times in this movie, which at the time was a cinema record. What I like particularly about that stat is it's only in the script 100 times, but the actors, being two craftsmen, figured out a way to. Over half of those F words were attributed to Joe Pesci in it. But what was the last movie you saw where Samuel L. Jackson said the F word the least amount of times? Major cast. They had tested a bunch of people. Ray Liotta was not the producer's main pick here, but like I said, Scorsese generally knows what he's doing. He had picked him out of Alec Baldwin auditioned for this and did not get it. There was some talk about Sean Penn or Tom Cruise playing that role. Al Pacino was offered the role of Jimmy Conway, the role that Robert De Niro played. And I love this story. So Al Pacino turned that down because he thought the role was too stereotyped. But so he turned that down to take the role as the mobster in Dick Tracy, which was literally a caricature of a gangster.
Oh, no.
So Pacino turned down this role and Han Solo from Star Wars. So maybe he needs to look at that agent, kind of have a discussion. Ray Liotta turned down the role of Harvey Dent in Batman, the role that eventually went to Billy D. Williams. He turned down that too, to be a pretty good move there at the end of the day.
Yeah, they really did Billy D. wrong in the Batman movie.
Yeah,
He did not get enough screen time. Goodness.
I'll stand by that to this day. Yeah,
Ray Liotta would have been so pissed if he took that wrong. I can imagine. Oh my god.
He's certainly, he's an angry dude. So given the fact, Scorsese generally knows what he's doing, there was a lot of pressure from the studio given his casting and the script in general. It went through a lot of iterations. The test audiences despised this movie, mostly because of the violence. But to this day, Scorsese says, I don't care what test audiences do. He just goes through them as a part of doing business. But he's never allowed it to make an artistic or creative decision for him. And test audiences are typically just tourists that are in Santa Monica that get offered a free, So why should Scorsese made Mean Streets and Raging Bull, and so I think he might know the right way to, But anyway, he had to suffer through that. But he said, I'm not changing one line. The only thing he did modify was instead of in the opening scene where Joe Pesci stabs Billy Batts, he cut the number of stabbings in half. So God bless Martin Scorsese. So let's kind of go through our first watch and we'll get started. So I remember the first time I saw this, again, it was in a theater I mentioned before in a previous episode called the Paramount Theater in Kankakee, Illinois. There's a nostalgia check. So, the premise of this show is going back and looking at things, and you don't remember things the way you remember it. I was so enamored of my monologue about the Paramount Theater the last time I spoke to it. I actually decided to look it up and put my money where my mouth was. So I got on their website and saw that it was still made in the 30s, and it's still a historic landmark, but it was not the the paradise that I remember. But there still are, the frescoes are still there, and it still looks very much like a vaudeville theater. But they kind of modernized it over the years, and the screen is significantly smaller than I remember. But I did check out their webpage, and they do have a nice little view of what the theater looks like now. So it's close enough, but it was not the palace of the Radio City Music Hall like I made it out to be. But I was on a weekend home from college, and I checked this movie out. And I remember just being kind of, even at the tender age of 19, feeling the weight of this movie and just knowing that I had seen something special. I know that sounds kind of corny, but given the movies that were out there at this time, this just kind of stood out, and just kind of, I knew this was something I was going to appreciate for a long time. So I really just again I can see that in that environment and um, at this beautiful theater and just seeing this wonderful movie that just was anything unlike anything I had seen before. I just took a lot away from it and just really enjoyed it. So, Mike, you remember the first time you saw Goodfellas?
Yeah, it was here in Rock Hill. It was at our Cinema 6, which wasn't quite the paradise uh, of your theaters.
Nope.
Yeah, it's all
Nope.
you don't need to look up a website on this theater. It's shut down. It's going to become
Yeah.
low income housing, so that's probably for the best. But
Yeah.
it didn't matter at the time. In 1990, it was the best theater of all, and I'm watching it, and this movie just blew me away.
Yep.
I was expecting kind of a Godfather kind of movie, where it was a little bit more a period piece, a little bit more genteel, and a little more like,
Yeah.
like or George Raft movie, where like you hear, hey, you're a wise guy, like that kind of movie.
Yeah.
And, this was so like eye opening and just violent and just the cussing and just was like wow, and
Yeah, it was raw. Yeah.
it was very gritty. Let's stick with gritty. And
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
just like I said, blown away. And it was kind of the same way that what it did for me, what gangster movies did, that Platoon did for war movies. It's like wow.
Yeah.
This was like you say, you couldn't put it into words at the time. But now looking back, you're like, wow, that was something special. That's game changing, as they would say. Like it really, it changed the whole genre of any kind of mafia or crime family kind of movies like that.
Sure. Yeah, so let's take a look at it as two 50-year-old schnooks, see if it still holds up, right? So it was kind of in a transition from the summer season to the fall season, and typically Hollywood kind of dumps its weaker releases, or in the months between August and September, and then October they kind of ramp up to their award season. So this was a big summer. We professed to how we love the '90s and how the movie explosion really kicked out. So just in this summer, 3 months prior to this, we had some really big ones like Total Recall and Dick Tracy, Days of Thunder, Ghost, Flatliners, Darkman, one of your favorites, Problem Child, one of my favorites. But Hollywood was really starting to kind of ramp up, and then it kind of transitioned into the fall season. After this was busy too. You had, of course, Home Alone, Edward Scissorhands, the Dances with Wolves, Misery. So I mean, there was a lot. It was a good time. It was a golden era for movies. This was just the '90s had just started to kick off chronologically, but from a movie standpoint, they really kind of kept that momentum. So. Some other things going on in 1990, Mike, before we went into the theater. Law and Order premiered that fall.
Oh, wow.
Believe it or not, that there was a time in our history where Law and Order wasn't on TV. Another big thing about 1990 is that it was announced in Atlanta we get the 1996 Olympics, Mike. Yep, remember that?
I do now.
Cheers was the number one show on TV. Bon Jovi's Blaze of Glory was burning off the charts in September.
Shut down, Blaze of Glory. Wow.
That's right. John Bon Jovi from New Jersey. A funny little commercial for a product called Life Alert had premiered, Mike.
We're coming for you immediately.
Inducing the Schadenfreude and all of us laughing at an old lady falling down.
Oh.
But she's fallen, and she couldn't get up, and we can't get enough of that.
Couldn't get enough of that one.
We had this in our heads as
what was 1990? What would be up number one on the charts then? Would it be? Is that Hammer Time? Is that MC Hammer? Or is that Milli Vanilli? What am I thinking? 1990. What are we listening to, Justin?
Well,
not
Milli
me.
Vanilli.
I never listened to modern music at the time. I was listening to 60s
Sure,
music.
yeah, sure you did.
What?
Yeah,
I was listening to Jerry Vale and Vic Damone. Come on.
Yeah, I do think that was the summer that Milli Vanilli got exposed for their lip syncing. Like,
good.
What the irony there is, I don't think you can find anybody that doesn't do that now. But whatever. But those were the songs that were in our head as we were driving to the theater, and we decided to go see what we thought was just going to be like an old school gangster movie. Then turned out to be something like a modern crime classic. So, Mike, if you're ready, hit the button.
Let's do it.
So the movie kind of opens up with our three heroes driving in their car in the middle of the night, and you can tell right away that something's bad. There's something's afoot, Mike. They hear this knocking in the car and go, "That's not engine trouble. That's they pull off to the."
You mean Bob Hope's not going to show up with boxing gloves on, so you got to knock out the knocks.
Or Joe
Yes.
Namath with vapor lock. No, but it turns out the problem with their car is that there's a half dead guy in the back of the trunk kicking, and they open up the trunk, and as we mentioned, Joe Pesci unsheathes a butcher knife out of his shark skin suit pocket, stabs him a few times, and De Niro kind of shoots him a few times, and you get that iconic scene where Ray Liotta slams the trunk shut and says, "Ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a gangster." And then Tony Bennett kicks in, and we hear Rags to Riches. That no one can hear that song without thinking of this movie. But then it kind of jumps forward to 1955 in East Brooklyn, where we kind of see the main character, Henry Hill. It's kind of his intro, kind of a prologue, kind of describing the mob culture that he grew up on the Brooklyn streets and what it was like, and how the wise guys, as they were called, were just adored and looked up as like heroes. He ends up getting a job at the cab stand, which is his first entry into joining these guys, being in their crew. Of course, he shows some promise. He's a hustler, but he works at a cab stand run by a guy named Tootie Cicero, who is the brother to Paulie Cicero, who's the mob boss. So he really takes a liking to this life and starts skipping school. And you get a real feel for the violence here right away, Mike. So Henry's Irish father gets a letter from the school saying that his son has been skipping school, and just wails on him, unloads on him, beats the crap out of him. The freeze frame, when
Oh yeah.
you see it looks to me like he's connecting with that leather belt, which is just very unsettling, because we grew up in a generation where occasionally we got the belt. Corporal punishment was not that uncommon, but to see it now in the context of today, to see a grown man beating the crap out of a kid, it's still unsettling, I guess. But we get a freeze frame there, and then through the narration. Oh, by the way, all the narration in this film is essentially Henry Hill, the real Henry Hill, verbatim. Interviews that he had with Scorsese and Nicholas Pileggi. These are essentially all his words verbatim. And he has that epic line, we all take a beating sometimes, which we can all kind of relate. The mob guy's response to this is easy: just threaten to kill the mailman. So they threatened to put him in the old pizza oven, Mike. And,
yes, I love the look too on the young Henry Hill's face when he's watching it. He's like, he just has this little just sly grin on his face when they're doing it to this poor postman. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's a neat observation, because that's kind of the theme of this movie, is that there's a normalization of this behavior in this little society that they're in, where it doesn't seem odd to them because everybody they know does this. That's kind of a recurring theme in the movie, that none of this odd behavior seems that odd because everybody's doing it. As he grows older, he gets a little more responsibility, and he starts parking cars, and he starts running numbers. He takes this job selling cigarettes. They're hustling cigarettes. He's selling them on the street, and he gets busted by the cops. And this kind of serves as, since he didn't go to school anymore, his graduation in the mob is kind of is shown in the scene where he gets thrown into jail, but he gets released. And rather than be shamed, he's rewarded by the mob guys, and that's when they really accept him. He meets Robert De Niro at this point. Robert De Niro plays the gangster named Jimmy Conway, who is really just kind of a murderous psychopath. But because of the Mike had talked about, he's the hero within the community, and he really kind of forms a bond with him. So he takes him aside and puts like $600 in his pocket and says, you got pinched, but you did it right. You never rat on your friends, and you always keep your mouth shut. And that's kind of a recurring theme in this movie too. So it's kind of shows you their mores, or their social mores system, like, as they all, they have their own kind of cultural rules and things like that. It was really kind of funny to see how that adapted. So
there's a code.
Yeah, that's the code, Mike. So they do a little, time jump here, and they go to 1963, and you see Ray Liotta and Joe Pesci in their, assuming is their early 20s, I think here, Mike, and they're starting to run a racket where they're
21.
Yeah, so they basically support themselves and support the crew by robbing Idlewild Airport, just pretty much every day. They called it's better than Citibank. Whatever they needed money, they would just rob the airport. It's here where we get to see Henry Hill kind of really come into the lifestyle and really appreciate it. And you see his wardrobe has changed, and it's established that he's part of this crew now. And so one night at the Bamboo Lounge, we get this wonderful kind of tracking shot where we get to meet the entire crew, and this is where we meet all the gangsters that are in Polly's group. What I liked here, Mike, was the nomenclature, the names, the nom de pleurs of these guys. So my favorite, we mentioned Jimmy 2 times. I really like that one. Freddie No Nose is another great name.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Johnny
Roast Beef.
Yeah, Roast.
Yeah, Johnny Roast Beef. Not unsurprisingly, quite portly man. Nicky Eyes. But this is where we experience this first of many iconic scenes where the crew's sitting around at the end of dinner and they're having drinks, and Joe Pesci's telling this wonderful story about getting beat up by a cop. This is the funny how Ray Liotta tells him that he's funny.
Yes.
Yeah. What I love about this scene is, did a little bit of research here. The only 2 actors that knew this dialogue were Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta. What you see there are their reactions, and this, for those that haven't seen this movie, just stop listening to this dumb podcast and go watch this movie.
Go watch it now.
just quit wasting time on us. But they talk about he's telling this story. Joe Pesci leads us to believe that he's hurt, or his feelings are hurt. He's offended the fact that he's been called funny. And as maybe guys know this more than the gals, but this is a common thing where you try to get somebody off their guard, try to shake them. So he throws this horrible line of questioning, confronting him to see if he'll shake. But none of the actors knew that was happening. And as Joe Pesci gets more aggressive, the scene really gets uncomfortable. And then, of course, it's I almost gotcha, and then everybody laughs. But that was all improvised, which I thought was
That's pretty good. That Ray Liotta laugh too, man. That'll stick with you.
that's got to be a real laugh, because I've heard him laugh like that in other movies. Yeah. They hint to their first big score here, and it was a crime, the Air France heist, where one of the Idlewild security clerks shares some information about a bunch of money coming in from France, and Henry and Tommy and De Niro steal the money. It's about $420,000, so that makes Henry. That he can't be a made guy because of his heritage, but it really puts him in good standings with the mob, and especially to Paulie. I think he gives him his tribute. They call it, Mike.
Yeah.
Pay money up to the top, but it kind of establishes Henry Hill as not only a criminal, but like a good guy. So as they're committing arson, trying to burn up the Bamboo Lounge for the insurance money, Joe Pesci and Henry Hill have a conversation about double dating, and Henry wants nothing to do with it. Ultimately concedes, and this is where we get introduced to Lorraine Bracco. So he stands up Tommy on the second date, and Lorraine Bracco comes speeding up and just lets him have it. Then you get the kind of classic love story where they hate each other at first, and then they end up loving each other.
I love the way they shift the narration to her point of view, just for and you're like, whoa, and
they take turns,
yeah. So you hear her story about how she met him, and it's kind of like one of those he said she said stories. It's really clever little trick that Scorsese did on that one.
So Henry Hill decides he wants to make amends, so he takes Karen on a real date, and that's when we get again the second of the major iconic scenes of all time. You get this big tracking shot where they enter the Copacabana through the back. This 4-minute long tracking shot with no cuts or no edits. And everybody in the world has tried to copy this scene ever since. So this was, I think they had to do this 8 different times, Mike. And most of the time was because Henny Youngman kept missing his cue. So they do the whole tracking shot, and when they got into the main ballroom, Henny Youngman forgot his line, or because it was one continuous shot. So what are you going to do?
Very end,
the guy was
dummy.
Guy was he's 130 years old. What are you going to do? But anyway, of course, Karen is swept off her feet by this guy who's got, unlimited money. He's kind of the ultimate bad boy, so to speak. And there's a neat little subplot where she's got a Long Island friend. It's implied that he's assaulted her, and then you get this really violent scene where she calls Henry and says, what happened, and Henry comes in and just pistol whips this guy, which is I forgot how brutal that scene was.
Yeah, I forgot that
Yeah.
scene totally because it was just this is kind of a one runoff kind of scene. You're like, oh, okay, we beat this guy up and just beat the shit out of him. And then she hides the gun for him, which is awesome.
That's really kind of a significant turning point or plot point in the movie, Mike, is that she takes this gun and hides it, and
Yeah.
she actually confesses that she was kind of turned on by that level of animosity and brute violence, but it kind of shows the fact that they've got a different set of social markers than the rest of us.
Yep.
So they have this wonderful scene that I would call it another iconic scene is the contrast or dichotomy of the two weddings. So they get married and have a short little modest service and her Jewish family, and then they cut to this Academy Awards gala of a wedding where people are given thousands of dollars.
Oh, yeah.
And it's spared no expense. So it's kind of a Cinderella story, but right away you can see that this marriage is not a storybook. There's already hints that Henry's womanizing and he's hanging out all night and not coming home. So there's trouble in paradise right away.
I'm sorry, but the scene where like the mom is complaining to Karen about like how late that Henry's staying out, and she's like trying to get the dad to say something. He's just sitting there and complaining about his digestion. It's just fantastic.
All I could think is, oh my God, I'm that guy on the couch.
I was like, oh, Jens, just shut up.
just sitting on the couch, rubbing his forehead with a belly full of undigested food.
Oh,
nothing he could do or say. I kind of hit home a little bit, Mike. But it's implied that they live this lifestyle for about a decade. Then we cut to like June 70. And we see like probably the world's saddest homecoming party. There's a little one of Henry's little dive bars are having there's a welcome home party from a gangster named Billy Batts, I think, who's played by Frank Vicente, who went on to play a role in Sopranos. This is where everything kind of turns. This is where all the movie starts to head down the path. Billy Batts is getting kind of tipsy, and he makes a few comments to Joe Pesci, who's got a bit of a Napoleon complex, Mike, and doesn't like to be insulted, and insults him about his shoe shine business when he was a kid.
Oh yeah,
the shine box, Mike.
Yep.
Yeah. What happens here is he comes back later, and they beat Billy Batts to death. So what I thought was really fun here was the kick cam.
Oh yeah, the overheads.
Yeah, De Niro stomping on this guy. No one does a foot stomping like Robert De Niro, for sure. But again, for authenticity, the character that played Billy Batts wanted it to look real, so he wanted to get in pads. He padded up and put some like armor in, and wanted the guys to really hit him. And of course, De Niro didn't. De Niro didn't have to be asked twice, so they literally beat the crap out of that guy. The problem is that Billy Batts is a made man, and you can't do things like that in the mob. So even if he insulted him a little bit, Mike,
a little bit, you insult him a little bit.
You got a little out of order. You insult him a little bit. Everybody's a gentleman until the shoes start flying. But this death really kind of shows where the things start to crack. Meanwhile, during all this, Henry Hill starts to form a plan with this guy named Maury, who is my favorite character in the movie.
The wig guy.
Yeah, the wig guy. You know what's best about Maury's wigs, Mike? They never come off.
Under what?
Under hurricane winds, they don't come off. But he plays this guy he's just a schnorrer, I think is the best word. That's the Yiddish term. One of my favorite lines from Jerry Seinfeld. He was explaining to Martin Short, just what's a schnorrer? What's a schnorrer mean? He goes, a schnorrer is the guy that only eats the cashews out of the assorted nut mix. He's an annoying little guy that always wants his money, and but anyway, they planned what they call the Lufthansa heist. To this day, this case has never been solved, but it ended up with the crew in question, the main characters in the movie. They steal about $6 million. And we get this great scene where Henry's in the shower, and he hears on the news that they stole this money, and everybody goes crazy. But this is where things really kind of start to turn as well, because Robert De Niro's character, Jimmy Conway, he's an old school gangster, and he's got a thing about rats, Mike. He doesn't like rats. And he's starting to worry. He's starting to worry that the crew may not be successful in this, because there's a Christmas party, for example, where I think Johnny Roastbeef shows up in a giant pink Cadillac days after the robbery.
Yep.
And one of my other favorites, Frankie Carbone, his wife walks in with a $20,000 mink. Robert De Niro just loses his mind. He starts to sweat. That this crew may not be the classic criminal I want to hang out with. So the last half of the movie is just kind of De Niro kind of slowly eliminating the crew, killing people, right? So, and some of these deaths are pretty horrible. It's particularly the aforementioned Johnny Roastbeef and his pink Cadillac. We get that scene where we get the Layla song,
Oh yeah.
the piano exit Layla, and again, if you hear this song, you think Goodfellas, but there's 120 songs in this movie. But he played a lot of the songs on the set, so he could kind of synchronize the camera work and the cinematography. So he would have the music playing just to make sure that everything matched. But that scene where we see both those people killed in the pink Cadillac, and then there's like a montage of dead bodies. Just the juxtaposition of this beautiful song and seeing all these dead Goombas, it's just really kind of unsettling. So he's kind of just reducing his risk of exposure there. He shoots Samuel L. Jackson because he's the first guy to kind of to drop the ball. And all the while, Henry's marriage is not going very well. He's taken on a mistress, Mike,
Or two.
or two, and Karen's not really. Karen was like was a Karen before Karens were Karens. She's a tough broad, and she didn't accept any kind of hanky panky. So their marriage kind of crumbles. But of course, one of the things about the mob is they have to keep up appearances, Mike, and so
Yep.
Polly makes sure that Henry gets back on the straight and narrow, and just in time for him to go to jail. He ends up spending a good chunk of the movie, 10 years in the middle of the movie. He has to go to prison. And that's where we get that amazing scene where Polly's shaving the garlic with a razor blade and
Vinny's making the pasta.
with too many onions.
Too many onions.
And the prison guard are bringing them iced lobsters and steaks. And I like the Adidas that they're wearing in there.
Oh, I know.
Gangsters in Adidas and bathrobes. I mean, come on. The takeaway from their time in prison is that Henry begins to start dealing drugs, and this is something that this crew had never done before. But he was kind of doing it to survive. And when he ultimately gets out of jail on parole, he swears to Polly that he won't sell drugs, but it takes him all of 10 minutes to break that vow. And he brings in Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro as part of his crew, and they do all this behind Polly's back. And Polly's scared because all the other mob bosses, this was their gateway to get into jail, because the drug charges were something that all their kickbacks and payoffs couldn't protect them from. And he never talked on the phone anyway, but he was always scared that he was going to get caught in a drug deal, and he didn't want anybody doing it. But of course, Henry. All these guys are scumbags, but that's what's so wonderful about this script is these guys are not good people, but you love them and you like them anyway. They're liars and they're murderers,
right? But they have a code,
yeah.
You think back to something like the movie The Godfather, and one of the reasons that Don Corleone gets in trouble in The Godfather is not wanting to deal in drugs. And then you have a movie like Goodfellas, and you got that consistency of one of the mob bosses say, "Don't mess with that stuff. It's not worth it. We have a good thing going with what we got. This is not part of what we do." And in a way, you're like, okay, these guys are criminals, but you got to kind of respect that they stay down this certain path. They don't go outside that lane.
As Lorraine Bracco says in her little monologue there, her narration, our husbands weren't brain surgeons; they were blue-collar guys, and they worked hard for their money. So during this time, they're selling the drugs. They get news that Joe Pesci is. They open up the books, Mike, and Joe Pesci's going to get made. So this is just the best thing for them because it's kind of like they're all getting made. And Mike, it doesn't go well.
No.
So he goes to the ceremony, opens the door, and then no one's there, and then Tootie shoots him in the back of the head, and we get that horrible scene where he gets one through the face and he lies bleeding on the floor, and it ends up being part of their the penance they have to pay for killing Billy Batts earlier in the movie. what I thought was interesting here, Mike, this particular scene is when De Niro gets the news in the phone booth, and of course his first instinct is just to smash stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the reality of him losing this his friend starts to sink in, and it was interesting. You could see like these alpha males or whatever, they're crying, and you can see the scene where Ray Liotta tries to comfort him, but he can't. He
Can't quite.
tries to raise
Yeah,
an
he
arm there.
want to put an arm on his shoulder, but it's like,
Yeah,
probably
it's like
don't do that.
there's something in the way they're wired. They just can't have that human
Yeah.
aspect. It was interesting to see the anguish that they were going through, not only for what happened to Tommy, but the fact that they couldn't, they didn't have the emotional uh,
But
bandwidth to
it was some real, it was some real Italian greaseball stuff.
That's what they said. Yeah, yeah. Tommy gets whacked. That's kind of the end of that era in a way. It's kind of symbolic. The transition from the old mob days to the new crime stuff that's where it kind of kicks in. So then we get to my personal favorite part of the movie is the last 30 minutes. Mike, are just this amazing. It's chronicles one day, Sunday,
Yeah.
May 11th, 1980, and there's a 20-minute shot of just all the events that happened in this day, and they're all framed perfectly with this amazing rock and roll soundtrack. I mean, there's a Harry Nilsson song, there's a Rolling Stones, there's Muddy Waters, there's George Harrison, but it's just this frenetic sprint of just odd thing. Like it's essentially that he's having a dinner for his brother, and he's trying to perform. He's trying to cook this big meal at home. In the meanwhile, he's trying to sell guns. He's getting chased by helicopters. He's coked out of his mind. He's trying to get this drug.
He's trying to
this
send
drug
his,
height. This
Yeah, he's trying to send his
drug
nanny
package.
to be a mule for some drugs.
Martin Scorsese's editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, I believe her name is she's worked with him on every film, and she doesn't get the credit she deserves. Editing is the most important thing in Hollywood, and there's so few good editors. But she's been the editor for every Martin Scorsese movie, and the way she cut these scenes together, it's unprecedented in film history, in my humble podcaster's opinion. But you are exhausted by the time this is over. You feel unpleasant. Spent the entire movie being not jealous, but kind of admiring the gangster life, right? And these 20 minutes is where the movie makes you pay for that. It's kind of your penance, your comeuppance. It's like this is what it really is, and it's just it's just amazing. So it ultimately ends up with Henry getting busted by federal agents, DEA agents, and getting busted. And it's scary. It's almost scary the way that it goes down.
Yeah, he ends up fearing for his life and having to sleep with a gun. Like,
Yeah. So, and then right after that, they literally show on the screen title card the aftermath, and it's them screaming in the house looking for all the cocaine he had stored, and Karen tells him she flushed it down the toilet. And then you just kind of see the walls crashing. Everything's kind of crashing in around him now. This is where everything goes bad. And of course, the bigger thing for Henry Hill is that word will be out that he went behind Polly's back and sold all these drugs, and that's his biggest fear. And what ultimately causes him to turn state's evidence and kind of rat out all his friends, Mike. And that's kind of
you're supposed to keep your mouth shut and not do that. I thought.
Yeah, but it's kind of anticlimactic end for him, because he ends up doing the thing that he breaks the code, and it's like there's no honor in what he does in his life. There's no honor in the way he's gone out. And he sits in federal court and calls out Jimmy Conway, and he calls out Paul Sorvino, and essentially dooms them all to prison, and then has to enter the witness protection program. And we're kind of left where it's supposed to be sad, and it is, but he makes it out with his life, but his real life is ruined, right? And so they kind of the last few scenes is just him in his bathrobe in some random suburban area in the country, complaining about
ketchup flavored pasta.
Yeah, he loses the life, and he's more upset about he misses the action, and he's got to live the rest of his life as like a schnook. And then we get that scene where Joe Pesci shoots us 5 times.
I don't. That's.
He shoots us into the camera. That is a callback to the Great Train Robbery, Mike. Scorsese, one of Scorsese's favorite movies. It used to that scene in the Great Train Robbery. One of the actors shoots the gun right into the camera. and this is in the early 20s when people didn't know what film was, and this would horrify and scare people to death, uh,
That's
but yeah,
funny.
it was like a controversial scene back then. But that was his homage to that film. And then Sid Vicious sings uh,
My way.
he did it my way. And then the movie's over. That synopsis in no way did any justice to this movie, guys, but it's it's a 2.5 hour movie, but it feels like an hour long TV show. It's just so well paced and so well done. You just kind of went through it, and it was just wow. So the box office and the awards and accolades. So it had only like a $6 million opening weekend, Mike. Not a blockbuster by any means. It ended up doing only like $46 million domestically and only 47 worldwide. So it only made $1 million outside the United States. But it did crush the other competition. It was the erotic thriller Deceptions, starring Harry Hamlin and Nicolette Sheridan. Like,
Oh my! Like you say, that was
and Rob,
that was a time. That's a dumping ground for movies. He's like, you know what? It's not going to do that well. Let's put it in the fall.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. That's where
early
the
fall.
phrase straight to video kind of came from movies like this.
Yeah.
But it got nominated for 4 Oscars, I believe. No, 6 Oscars rather. It only won one Oscar, Mike. Joe Pesci won, but it did not win Best Picture. It did not win Best Director. It did not win Best Screenplay. It did not win Best Editing because it was all that was won by Kevin Costner in Dancing with Wolves.
Of course it was.
That pretentious, self-serving, overhyped drama
Well, we
took
would
all the awards that year.
we would see a repeat of this 6 years later when Shakespeare in Love somehow beat out Saving Private Ryan. Don't get me started.
Yeah. Well, I will. At some point, I'll get you started.
Some point.
Get you started good.
Oh.
But yeah, but I don't think. I mean, Dances with Wolves was not a bad movie by any means.
No.
But does it have the legs that Goodfellas has? I don't think so. AFI put this movie into their top 100 list, of course, and it was the first movie from the 90s to be preserved in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. So,
Wow.
yeah.
I'll tell you something.
I guess it was a good movie, Mike.
I think it was.
So let's put it through the. Let's put it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me go first. There was no change for me. I've seen it. The problem with a movie like this, and it's the same with a movie like, for me, it would be, Star Wars or Hunt for Red October or even the Godfather movies. It's like I've seen these movies so many times now. Like, I don't even know how many times I've seen Goodfellas by this point. But looking at it now as we do this podcast, you're kind of, I've gotten really jaded, and I'm looking for flaws. I'm looking at this movie going, there's nothing wrong with this movie. You know what? There's one scene in this movie, and I don't know if it's done on purpose, but it's so small a detail. When, Joe Pesci's mom, Tommy's mom, is fixing them dinner before they go upstate and bury the body. They're eating pasta, and Jimmy, the Robert De Niro character, is twirling ketchup over his pasta. Like, really liberally, like putting a whole bunch of ketchup on his pasta and just digging right into it. And I'm thinking, wow, this is really good details. I mean, I think how funny that was. Here's an Irish guy eating authentic Italian cooking and just throwing ketchup all over it. I'm thinking, is that a flaw or is that like a really good detail? You see that. And,
well, let me do inside baseball for you, Mike. That is a really good detail because they had Henry Hill on speed dial. Scorsese did. And they called to say, hey, how did Jimmy Conway pour his ketchup? And that's what Henry told him. That's how he did it. So,
are you shitting me?
Yeah.
Really?
I'm not.
Oh, my gosh.
No. Yeah.
Well,
it worked.
I think the only other, it's not even a flaw in the movie, but it's a flaw now that we've kind of gone a few years into the future. Henry Hill himself is portraying this movie probably a little better than he actually is in real life. I know he did come out of hiding just a few years after this movie was released, and he did this Howard Stern interviews and a couple other places I've seen him. And the guy he's gotten busted and pinched for drugs and I think a couple prostitution. He's a genuine creep. In the movie he's portrayed, I think, with a little bit more sympathy, and I think that's my one problem. But like I said, this is seeing it now. That my one issue with
Right.
the movie is his portrayal is kind of like a compassionate guy in a way. Whereas he
Right. Right.
when Joe Pesci or Tommy shoots Spider for just insulting him, and you see Henry Hill run to him, and you shot him. I can't believe you did that. I,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't see the real Henry Hill being like that, but that's like I
Yeah.
said, this is Monday morning quarterbacking 32 years later, but that's
Yep.
that's
Yep.
small potatoes. But the movie itself is fantastic. Can't even tell you how many memes and times it's been quoted just by people I know or people you see on TV.
Yep.
The progression of escalating violence, then drugs and paranoia. Like you say, that focusing on that one day there in the last part of the movie just kind of brings you back down. It's like, okay, these guys were glamorous. Look at Henry in his nice suit. Now he's like in an untucked shirt. Just that
Yeah.
progression. You just kind of, I love that whole part of it. Like you said, the one shot scenes where they go into the Bamboo Lounge or the Copacabana. It's almost like a bad relationship. You're really falling in love with this whole gangster kind of
Yeah.
lifestyle, and then at the end you're like, wow, I'm glad that's not me. Like, look at that guy.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not that schnook. I would either be dead or eating ketchup flavored pasta. So
Yeah. We
I
would be
know.
terrible gangsters.
I could do the food. I could do the food. I love that's
Yeah.
another thing in this movie and a lot of Scorsese movies is the way the meals and eating, and that's kind of a
Yeah.
centerpiece in a lot of the scenes. And you're just like, that's another part of the just capturing that whole
Yeah.
lifestyle. It's just amazing.
Yep. Well, I'm kind of the same way. I mean, I was just awestruck when I saw this, even at a very immature 19. I just kind of knew that this was something above and beyond me. And it's not like I haven't seen this movie, once a year, every year. But just to look at it out of context and look at it from a critical eye, I can't really do it. I mean, there's watching it last night was different because it was just kind of a comfort movie for me. But watching it for this show, I decided, well, let's look at it like you said. Let's try to see, let's analyze it. Let's be critical of
Yep.
it. And it was just tough, man.
I mean,
in fact,
yeah.
it kind of, yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I mean, we've seen 3 stink burgers in a row here, and then we see this. And I mean, like I said, it's kind of you're jaded. You're wanting to like. There's got to be something,
Yeah.
and refreshing to see a movie that you can't poke holes in, and you're looking at
Yeah.
it and you're like, this is. I don't. But go ahead. I was going to say I don't think
Yeah.
this is a movie can be made today, but it's.
I don't think it can be made today with today's standards and social mores. I don't think anybody would touch it. But I think that's what, like, I think almost out of spite, I like it more. This will sound wrong, but I have an admiration for the brutality of this movie and the fearlessness of this movie.
Yeah.
It was like the last hurrah for these kind of movies. They all got a little bit softer. Even, I mean, Casino came out years later. It was relatively close, and The Irishman. They're not that far away, but they don't have the teeth that this movie has, and I don't know. It's just one of these. It's bigger than the sum of its parts to me. It's just a standalone movie. So, yeah, wow. But I did feel old. It did make me feel old.
I know.
But So, Mike, thank you for your time on this one. This was a fun one to review. It was certainly a different.
Thank your
different
wife.
event for us.
This was a good suggestion.
Well, she gets enough praise. Don't worry. Yes, I will thank her. This was her suggestion, so this one's to you, dear. Just some final thoughts, guys. We are still taking email submissions. If you'd like to be part of the show, if you'd like to review some top 5 lists with us in the coming future, we'd really like to have you be part of that. You can check all of our show information on our Instagram page. We'll be setting up a Facebook group here shortly. We'd love to have you guys participate in that. Again, another shout out to all the folks that found the show through my LinkedIn page. Again, we continue to grow our audience, and we're just so excited about that. We really appreciate everybody continuing to listen. I was telling Mike before the show started, this month marks in our brief 6 months. This marks the most downloads we've received of any month so far. We just continue to grow and grow, and it's through people listening like you guys. So we love doing it. So we really appreciate you downloading and listening. Rate the show. That really helps the algorithm for Apple, at least gets more people listening. So we'd be very appreciative if you could help us do that. So Mike, that should wrap it up. We'll be back soon with new, probably worse movies. But anything else you want to say before we wrap this one up?
Justin, go home and get your shine box.
No, I'm going to go get the papers. All right, guys. So for Mike, this is Justin, and we will see you again next time.